Welcome, welcome to Astrology for Business Evolution 2019. And this is your class number 2 on highly magnetic signature style with Milada Sakic. So welcome, welcome. Let's continue on. And here we go. We have a bit to cover today, and it is not going to be as extensive as the class number 1, which was meant to be a summary. However, we have a couple of different concepts here to talk about, and then several examples. So you want to really allocate the time that you can listen to this information and integrate before we get started here. Okay, so let's welcome. Let's continue on here. So we are on our class number 2 on amplifying your highly magnetic signature style. This is primarily, we're going to be talking about the style in the context of social media presence, but really your overall presence as well in your business and your platform, social media platform in particular in today's day and age and beyond. Okay, so let's continue on. Right, so we'll chat about your unique brand individuality in the context of the examples for social media presence once again, and overall in your life to be more relatable. And then also what I am introducing for this version of the course, which at this point is Astrology for Business 3.0, is understanding and reconciling the paradoxes of each astrology sign and their different levels of expression, including effective, ineffective, conscious, unconscious. So we did talk about this in the past in the effective expression and then the shadow expression. So now I'm deepening this further and breaking it down and distilling it more in terms of paradoxes. Now, I oftentimes talk about it, and I did share about these in the past, but it was more in the context of examples, and as I've mentioned in the past, like I always aim to distill and really create into slides as much of the wisdom that comes through that I find helpful to be using in working with clients and understanding charts and so on and so forth. So this is what I've done today. Now this is a little bit, it's going to be a little bit, I can see how there is a paradox within it, is that we can say, oh, well, it's a little bit more advanced, but it really, to me, it is an intermediate perspective. And I do actually find that it helps to talk about it even at this sort of beginner to intermediate level. So wherever you are, but it really is something that we're going to be deepening more very much into the advanced classes and beyond. In fact, it's one of the perspectives and concepts that fascinates me the most. Okay, and so here we have our solar system. Reminder, right? I like to bring this always or frequently to remind you of not just of the vastness of the solar system, and really the planetary system that we are working with, but also that you can see somewhat of the comparison between, say, again, Jupiter is the ruler of, right, to remind you about the rulerships as well, ruler of Pisces, traditional ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces, and then also Neptune as the co-ruler, okay? And then Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, right? And Aquarius, traditional ruler of Aquarius, and then Uranus as the co-ruler. Okay, and then you can see here Mars as the ruler of Aries, and then it also is the traditional ruler of Scorpio, right? Compared to Pluto over here. And this time we have the moon here shown together with the Earth, okay? So also periodically I like to remind you how here, yes, that our precious a little moon here, as it appears to be little, right, is here together with with Earth, and it appears to be very little compared to the vastness of the sun. But really, from our perspective on Earth, right, when we look at the sun and the moon, right, obviously sun during the day and then the moon at night, what do we notice? Right, they're similar. They appear to be similar in size. And of course, this is because of the relative distance of the moon, right, to the Earth, and obviously its size, but really the relative distance, because it's very close to the Earth, the closest, in fact. And then obviously sun being a lot more distant, but also larger. So anyway, long story short, I've talked about this before, how the perception matters, and the fact that we have the sun and the moon that appear in the day and the night sky, obviously almost approximately the same size, to me speaks to that equal importance of the solar and lunar principle. Okay. Let's continue on here. So we talked about what astrology of wholeness is last time, and then the core principle. So we're going to be deepening that today in terms of not just the understanding more of the polarities of expression, but even the paradoxes that are inherent within each of the sign archetypes. And then they're also deepened within obviously the polarities, but even within obviously the sign, and then also the house that they may be in, right? So that's this is why, to me, it is important to understand these different levels of expression. And we're going to chat about that today, where we are at, what is available within the different levels, or whatever way you want to, different arrays, if you like, of expression. Of each sign, in particular when you're looking at your sun, moon, and the ascendant, and we're going to see why and how those are important in terms of your unique signature style. And we're going to learn next time how also knowing who are we really even here to relate to, how that also plays into our style as well. Okay, and so let's continue on here. This is here just a reminder of the 12 houses in a obviously wheel style. So today we're going to be focusing more on the first house, and then somewhat here on this polarity of the first and the seventh. I'm going to touch on that, and then we're going to talk more about that next time when we speak about our ideal clients community and beyond. Okay, so the first house, which really here is the beginning, if you like, of the starting here, really defines the starting point of the cosmic design, or your natal chart or your birth chart, if you'd like. And we can identify it when we know your time of birth, when your time of birth is as accurate as it can be. Okay, if we do not know your time of birth, or some, right, the client's time of birth, or your family members, or if it's not as accurate, then it's a little bit more trickier, right, to speak about this framework that we like to, especially in this course, where I'm going to be focusing a lot on the first, seventh, and the third key, as I like to refer to them, or the first, second, and the third house. And they're their polarities as well, but in particular, first, second, and the third. There is a reason that the first, second, and the third house are first, okay, in the zodiac. So today we're going to be focusing more on the first, but it's not just about the first house. By the way, also the first house, it gives us information about your physical health, your relationship with your body, with yourself, and with your vitality. But also important information about because it's relationship with life, and your body. And all the other relationships really extend from it, right? Just as all other relationships in your life extend from your relationship with yourself and your relationship with your body. We tend to project stuff onto our body that is a representation of our relationship with life itself as well. which is why, just one of the million reasons why the body is an important vehicle for our, not just for our expression, but our healing as well. And obviously we need it for practical reasons here, to be able to do what we've got to do here, to be visible and relatable and so on and so forth, and even effective at that. So the first house speaks about body image, as I like to call it, right? So when we speak about positive body image, really we are, to me, I translate that immediately into the first house. Perspective. Okay, the first house perspective, because we can have at least 12 of these different perspectives, 12 of the primary perspectives. It also gives us information about the core lifestyle choices that we need to be making. I speak more about this in my healing-oriented courses, and some of you have taken those, when we talk about translating now these archetypes and energies into habits. I touch on that. I will touch on that a little bit here, and I have done in the past, just because I find that the habits, and this once again from a Virgo rising perspective, right, is a helpful way to integrate what we are talking about here. Because we can talk about the descriptions, we can talk about these expressions, but if we're not translating that, not just into a brand or even into an expression, right, it into a possible, probable expression, if we're not translating that into something more tangible and consistent, such as daily habits, then how are we really integrating that and living that, embodying that in our life, okay? So your rising sign, which is the sign that was rising as we, so the astronomical, if you look, astrological expression, more technical expression for that would be the sign that was rising on the eastern horizon at the time of your birth, okay? So it is known as the rising sign, or also known as the ascendant, or the first house is basically the rising sign, and then pretty much the whole entirety of that first, like a pizza slice, really the section of that zodiac and or your chart, which can have more than one sign included, or if not intercepted. In some cases, I've seen charts with 2 interceptions. Did I see 3? I may have seen in some more northern locations, and so, or more extreme, right, locations. Definitely have seen several charts with at least 2 interceptions, but and there are so-called house systems, astrologers that do not use the systems that allow you to actually see these. I still like to use systems like Placidus and so on and so forth, that actually where you can see the complexities that show up as a result of your location of birth. To me, that is important, rather than just trying to working with systems that so-called the whole sign or the equal house. Now, all power, right, to astrologers, obviously, that use that and that resonate with that. I personally, and this could be maybe because I have Uranus in the second and I have strong Aquarius, I like to see that original, and to me, seeing these different houses and interceptions give important keys as to what other, like confirmations or what else may need to be better expressed, that may be hidden in our chart. It's just a really helpful way to do that. Anyway, so your rising sign reflects our personal, or reflects your personal choice to incarnate at this time, to express your free will, and then have autonomy over your choices. So to have autonomy, basically, to me, it shows one of your core, if not the core intention for coming into the body at this time, and even what kind of body you're looking for. What is basically like the platform, your primary platform, operating platform or operating system. So it also tells us how we want to or choose to be seen, our persona, leadership and presentation style. And to me, as I've said many times in the past, it's not just descriptive that is static, such as, oh, okay, now I'm going to give you slides to describe the rising sign, and therefore you can work with that and just run with it and, you know, use that for branding purposes, for getting clear on our image and so on and so forth. To me, it's a whole lot more than that. And the chances are you already have gotten an idea as to what I'm speaking about, and I'm going to talk more about that today. To me, it's basically, so we have, the first house has that very first impression, if you like external image perspective to it. Even external beauty, if you'd like, right? Especially if we're talking about Libra or Taurus rising, or Venus connected with the first house, which represents the concept of beauty and aesthetics. But what about inner beauty? What about magnetism? What about laws that to make that possible in the first place, right? Such as law of attraction, such as also a law of polarity, and so on and so forth. Anyway, the early developed attitude that helps us to be more relatable to me as to, why do we even care? Then, if not just for the image and branding purposes or identity purposes, it's if there is a part of you that does desire to be more relatable, right? To be more magnetic, to be recognizable and more seen in social media, in your business, and beyond. Some of the very, very important keys you're going to find here, and that are going to help you just to be more really integrated within yourself, to be more assured, to be more coherent, if you like, depending on the sign that you have rising, because that will tell you even what it is that you are looking to appear more like. For example, coherence is important to me, and not only because I have Mercury in Gemini, but also because Mercury is the ruler of my Virgo ascendant. So mercurial concepts are important. I have North Node in the third house as well. So for you, that may be slightly different depending on, we're going to chat about that a bit today. So the first thing that people see about you and your face and your clothes, your, again, image, but including the nonverbal cues as well. Now, we're going to touch a little bit, even though this is intermediate class, and we're going to touch on some of the even more advanced concepts, but I am keeping it at the fundamentals. What I mean is that we're going to be primarily looking at the signs, in fact, really understanding the signs and their paradoxes, and then the polarities and how much we can actually see based on this, especially when we know what to look at. And we're going to highlight, once again, we're going to continue highlighting the sun, moon, and the ascendant. And but having said that, we can also look at the ruler of the ascendant, just as I had mentioned in my own case. I have Virgo rising, therefore Mercury is the ruler. Secondary, if you like, or tertiary, important indicator as to where you're going to likely to find me. Just in your chart, if you have Leo rising, wherever your sun is in your chart, this is where we're most likely to find you. Okay, focusing and or caring about that aspect, or tending to, and so on and so forth. So the planetary ruler I refer to as you yourself, or if you're like an ambassador of you, representative of you, and also your lifestyle director. Okay, so in a sense, from one perspective, it's you. From another, it could be like your assistant, if you like, an extension of you. So, because everything in your chart are different expressions, but this expression of your soul, of yourself, of your physical self in this case, which is why I said we're going to likely to find you there physically. Because why? Because the first house is representative of the body, right? The physical health, the body, the personal space, the most personal you. What do you most identify with? Along with the sun, especially the moon rather, right? And then the south node, which we talk about as well. And we'll a little bit later on. So also direction in life, your direction, your purpose, where we need to start focusing early on in our life. I talk, or we discussed in, for example, the Astrology and Healing class, right? How the ascendant gives us important information as to what is that first thing in the morning habit we need to develop, or action we need to take. Very, very important. Meaning it's a helpful reminder why we need to be focusing on that, along with the sun and the moon and habits associated with that, but just from a slightly different perspective, right? We said from the lunar perspective, what we need to heal and relax more into receiving and even allowing support around that. But again, it's going to depend on the sign it is in, because some lunar perspectives are going to be more receptive, and some are actually not going to be as receptive. and that's okay, right? If you have moon in Aries or even Leo in Sagittarius. So it's a little bit of a different, right? It's more realized, if you'd like, especially in Aries, but also Leo and Sagittarius, right? So any planets in the first house, especially within 3 to 5 degrees of that ascendant, we're going to see that in Angelina Jolie's chart, for example, and so on, also influence our image, body, appearance, and our first impression. You can simply add that planet, or even the ruler of that planet, that energy, as a I will refer to it as a modifier, or I will refer to it as a subtone as well. So it's almost like you have a, say, for example, in my case, I have Mercury, I have Virgo rising, right? And then I have Pluto close to the ascendants within 5 degrees. So it's as if I have Virgo rising with a subtone of Scorpio, okay? Or you could say a subtone of Pluto. And then we can, we have intercepted signs, which if you have another sign, or if you have at least 20, I'm going to say 23. I use that magic number, but it's really more closer to 25. I refer to that as largely intercepted in that house, let's say the first house, but especially if that sign is completely intercepted, included in the first house, meaning it's not even, doesn't even appear in any other, on the second house cusp or the first, obviously, then very, very important. Just in a little bit more introverted, if you'd like, hidden away, but it's an important something we're going to talk about a little bit later on, should this interest you, because the most important thing today in particular is to get an idea as to what are the key elements that help you to create a signature style. Okay. So we talked about the core energetic integrity keys, the primary ones. And last time we talked about the sun and the moon as the primary, really your primary energetic partnership or energetic relationship, or it really is a sacred partnership. It is so super essential for our vitality, well-being, fulfillment, soul expression, right? Healthy expression, healthy backbone, right? From a solar perspective, our own healing. So, right, just many different reasons. Now, the first house, and then bipolarity, the 7th. So as we refer to that, or I like to refer to it as the key relationship axis, okay, is probably equally important. I'm going to say equally important because to me, the sun, moon, and the ascendant, all 3 of those elements are important. And so unless, for example, somebody does not know their time of birth, in which case then obviously the ascendant, descendant, right, or ascendant is not going to be accurate, not known, unless you work on rectifying that or identifying that. There are softwares to do that. There are ways to do that, approximately based on somebody's appearance, and there are actually specific ways to do that based on certain events in life and monitoring that and seeing how, right, when things are activated based on certain planetary transits. But anyway, that's a story for another time. So if somebody does not know their time of birth, then obviously the skill relationship axis is not relevant. Now, this is a very small amount of people, but just wanted to mention that, right? In which case, the sun and the moon energetic partnership becomes the primary and, if you like, a secondary, extra important, okay? So from like overall perspective, the sun and the moon would be the most important, right? Because it's going to work for everybody. regardless of whether somebody knows their time of birth or not, and whether it's accurate or not. And when we do know, and as accurate as possible, like ideally within 15 minutes, I'm going to say, even though within half an hour, depending on, unless that ascendant is close to either the end of a sign or at the beginning, like early degrees. Anyway, long story short, hopefully that makes sense, right? Just wanted to emphasize, but when we know the time of birth, then the sun and the moon, and then the core relationship axis, both are important. So we'll talk more about this next time, in fact, the key relationship axis, because we're going to touch on that today. But in special, is going to be important when today, the purpose of this class is to help you to gain more understanding as to your primary, really operating perspective, if you'd like, your primary point of view that needs to start at the ascendant, and then you need to keep in mind the descendant, and we'll again deepen that next time and how that relates to your attracting your ideal clients, your ideal community, but also very much to basically get harmonize more within yourself. I have that in another slide there, mentioned why it is important to rapidly evolve the expression of our descendant, which is the 7th house. The ascendant as well, but as much as we can be in resistance to it, depending on especially what we have in the 1st house and that relationship with ourselves and other things, most people do tend to have good familiarity with their ascendant, and although there is good work that can be done in integrating and embodying that can help us to be more anchored within that perspective and relatable and even more expressed. Okay, it once again, it's a work in progress, and we're going to see today through different expressions and so on and so forth. So some of the key questions here: how do I reconcile my key relationship, right? Embracing yes axis, embracing yes and approach. We'll deepen that next time again. How do I remain in an energetic integrity with my, right? So both my personal and then the social expression. The personal expression would be the ascendant. The social would be the descendant, but really our personal, if you like, expression, or really where the start of our brand, if you like, or personal identity, really, even more so, even more anchored than the sun. We talk about the sun as an important, it really gives us a sense of self, but it's more of a frequency. It's more of a, like I like to think of it as really a frequency of something, an energy that kind of fills really the framework that is created by the houses, the whole house system, right? That your cosmic design really gets raises from. Okay, so. Anyway, so it is important to build daily habits, as I mentioned. We're not going to get into that in detail today, but it is important to send our conscious awareness. This is why it's important to send our conscious awareness to it, and then focus on accepting and then harmonizing with and starting at the ascendant, but also the descendant. So we'll chat about that today. Now, one of the core things when I look at the chart that I'm asking, other than also very much obviously the sun and moon and the ascendant and some of these core really ways that are looking to be expressed, that are either well expressed or in some cases not as effectively expressed, I look at where are the gaps. And while we can look in the chart and then also obviously talk to the person and then get a sense of where the gaps are. Because, for example, we're going to be looking at somebody's sun and the moon, or in the ascendant, and then, we're here sharing with them how they need to show up. But they're like, oh, I wish, right, I could embody more self-acceptance. Oh, I wish I could operate from gratitude, right? So, for example, if they had Sagittarius rising or if they had Cancer rising. So, right, we can notice that in the conversation, but even before that, knowing that the sun and the moon and especially the ascendant, in my experience, the ascendant is going to give an important gap. And then bipolarity, once again, it's the ascendant descendant axis. The first and the seventh house axis is going to give an important gap that needs to be bridged in our own psyche, in our own awareness, in our own relationships, starting with our relationship with self, to be a more integrated human being. So it's the awareness, where is the gap? Where is the awareness? Where is the growth needed? Where is the more integration? Where is the wholeness gap? So it first becomes obvious in our first house. Not so much the moon and the sun, in fact. Yes, while we're all looking to become a better version of ourselves based on the guidance of our sun sign, but it is one way or the other we're doing it. The ascendant is a very interesting, very, very interesting, I refer to it as an energetic nutrient that can something like we're consciously resisting it. There's almost like this, and I see this with a lot of people. It's like one of the most important paradoxes that I find is how we are expressing keenly a level of expression of our ascendant, and then keenly resisting another key level expression of our ascendant. Now that can sometimes be with the sun as well. And why the sun and the ascendant are both a little bit more future oriented, but there's something even more specific, right, with the ascendant, and it's even more critical, you could say, in relationships and just feeling more anchored within ourselves and focused and clear and decisive, right? All of that first house stuff. So at the ascendant, I refer to it as the primary gap. And so to me, the ascendant says, focus here first, right? When in doubt, focus here first in order to evolve, to accelerate your growth, to fulfill your purpose and your potential. So there's an essential energy of our soul expression that must be consciously expressed in the interplay and interconnectedness between our ascendant and then our ideal opposite in the seventh or so-called descendant. Okay, so we'll talk more about that next time. But to me, it's just so important to understand them together rather than just ascendant, right? Just the ascendant, the first house. There's only so much of first house that we can talk about before it starts feeling dislocated, as if it's missing an important element here, and it is. There is an important focus when we need to dissect things and to understand. It's like zoom in, right? To the first house, depending on the question we're asking. For example, what choices do I need to make? And including here, what we're looking, how can I be more highly magnetic, right? How can I be more self-directed? What is my most aligned leadership style? And so all of those questions, we need to start the primary perspective in the first house. But it's just bipolarity. It does not exist in a vacuum outside of the seventh, okay? Just like Aries and Libra. So the seventh house is still a secondary perception to our first house, unless our question is socially oriented or partner oriented, right? Such, how can I achieve harmonious relationships? So to that question, we would look at the seventh, but again, can you see how still the first house is like so important, because everything starts there. Because how I relate to myself in the first is very much going to be shown and mirrored back to me in the relationships, and it's going to be the same for you, okay? So once we identify the primary awareness gap, we need to fill that gap with the sun-moon integration. So you can think of it as a more dynamic consciousness. There's a more dynamic energy with the sun and the moon and way of being that's connected with a sense of, again, aliveness and a wellness and a sense of I amness. We can refer to it as our egoic individuality or unhealthy backbone, along with feeling safe to be who we truly are, right? Both the solar and the lunar, okay? So the key life themes to be mastered primarily from the ascendant per lens. So this is so very important to understand, and it really does not need to be complicated. I find people constantly asking, how to do this and how to be more seen and how to be more engaging and so on and so forth. And yet they're not conscious. They're like, oh yeah, I'm ascendant. And then they're not doing it as much. And many people are. And you're going to find that when you do, and I'm going to provide you here tons of keys, including the most important ones, it really, everything else becomes so much more easier, including feeling more anchored within yourself and more self-directed, rather than, other people directed. Now, unless you have Libra or seventh house very, very strong, in which case for you it is important to lean more into the collaboration and the cooperation, okay? So we want to lead with our ascendant expression. For example, with the Virgo Pisces, with a conscious focus, right? So we're expressing with a conscious focus on the Virgo ascendant's higher expression integration. So it's like starting a grade school at a certain level and then gradually progressing to a fuller integration, right? So we start with Sun and then you're integrating the polarity. And don't try to jump to the integration of the descendant. And I'm going to offer you here several really steps. You need to understand where you are at. If you're still perplexed with how to embody your ascendant, don't try to jump into, it can be actually helpful sometimes to learn through the right elimination or the opposite, but do try, to understand yourself first, from providing again that your birth time is correct from the ascendant perspective. The whole spectrum of our life experience flows back and forth between the first and the seventh until we master it and fully integrate it by recognizing where we can get stuck in over-attachment. We can be stuck in one side of the polarity. Also, when we have the south node in that sign, whether it's the ascendant or the descendant, by the way, whether we have the moon, right? Because it's both are about the past. Pluto, also karmic, even Saturn. We can even express, even more resistance with that. If we have multiple planets in the same house, that's typically going to be signs, potentially over attachment. But you also do need to honor attachment, if you like, or focus in those areas based on how many elements you have expressed there, right? When you see design, you trust the design. Don't try and judge it, but just make it the best educated guess based on knowing yourself and based on what you see showing up in your life in terms of when you need to focus a little bit more elsewhere. So we can also be in resistance to express a particular side of it. For example, when we have Saturn, by the way, we can even resist Pluto. We can resist the sun, believe it or not, right? We can resist the sun. In some cases, the moon, especially if moon maybe has an aspect with Saturn or Pluto, especially conjunction, because there could be more pain or even rejection or some things that we don't want to necessarily embody or work with associated with it. So pay attention to that. But typically, most people identify, if not over-identify, with their moon, okay? Most people. But it could be the sun for some people, or other people who have Sun-Saturn aspect or Sun-Pluto, right? Or Sun-Mars, and then they have elsewhere more Libra orientation, you see? So this comes a little bit more with the experience as well. And then any planets that we are in an opposition, right, that are literally in the first and the seventh, will most readily help integrate that polarity. So if you have a planet in the first and the seventh, or even the 12th but like at the end of the 12th, right at the cusp of the first and right at the cusp of the seventh, let's within 3 to 5 degrees, that actually emphasize the importance of integrating that polarity, and it actually helps you. It doesn't say you got to do it and figure it out on your own. It actually offers you keys as to how to do that based on what planets we're talking about, okay? So like both levels of consciousness need to be more paid attention, integrated. So solution is integrating the key relationship axis into an effective daily habit. So see, I'm talking more about this even before we distill here now the specific, where the sun, when we talk about the sun and the moon, specifically from the purpose of the signature style and amplifying our magnetism and our relatability, if you like, okay? Because this goes back to the astrology of wholeness. To me, if we don't have that astrology of that wholeness perspective, then the foundation that everything else is based on is not as solid as it could be. But again, keep in mind, you're learning this from Virgo rising and Taurus sun, right? So having that solid foundation for somebody like me is essential. So, so how do we do that? By first resolving the key relationship axis dilemma and paradox between a personal and social way of being. And we're going to bring this a little bit more, I hope a little bit more simpler before we deepen this next time. When we understand, who we are now in relationship to somebody else, and how do we meet those needs. Because there are even paradoxes to understand even within each individual archetype. Each individual archetype, and it's still the polarity comes into play. But I mean, then in that case, it's really, there are multi-layers really of paradoxes and contradictions to work with. So as I said, the axis of personal social awareness offers essential energetic vitamins that are perceived to be missing by you. Really, it's not like they could be perceived missing by others, but really others, when they notice that, we're typically going to be chuckling because we already do typically with the ascendant and even the descendant, we have an awareness of it. We have an acute awareness. It's something we're looking at on a daily basis, okay? So, so for example, if accessing and embodying our peacemaking Venus doesn't come easy, then we may be born with a Libra rising. So we may have a Libra, we may have Venus in Taurus or Venus in a Libra. But if for whatever reason we haven't had enough of those experiences in previous lifetimes and it's fairly new, for us maybe, we're not just comfortable with that yet. We may be born with Libra rising as well, or Taurus rising, just to give us an additional boost, if you like. That is important, okay? For our wholeness, for achieving our wholeness in this lifetime and our purpose as with that. So if embodying our Mars hasn't been easy and it's essential for our well-being, for example, if we are meant to be a leader or take, action, inspire others and so on, be a trailblazer, then we can be born with Aries rising or Aries strong elsewhere, right? So it's going to depend on what, where, and how those, and of course we're going to have many multiple ways of how this could show up, or we could have Mars in the first house, or otherwise Mars angular. Mars could be in the 7th or the 10th. So a little bit more on that, you can read up on that, right? So the ascendant, the most effective and relatable soul expression for a personalized accomplishment, right? This is where you develop a personal point of view, personal platform, where you start creating a brand, becoming aware even of what that is, and our signature style that can show up from our looks and what people know of us, and even our vibe to our offers, right? That leads into the second, and then the third, what we talk about and market and so on and so forth, okay? And at the descendant, we access the most effective unifying soul expression for now. Unifying, what does that mean, Milada? So meaning from when we are interested in working with others more, like when we're relationship oriented, relationship building oriented, teamwork, collaborative, cooperative, co-creative, if you like, efforts. Okay, so this axis creates a healthy tension that's necessary to remind us where more awareness is needed and where more optimization of our embodied experience is possible. Now, if that tension manifests as a strong internal conflict, and what conflict? Well, look at your ascendant, descendant, right? I've got slides today here to help you to get clear on that, including now deepening our understanding of the signs through paradoxes, and as well as different expressions of 4 different levels of expression of each sign. We talked about them already, but just in a little bit more organized way, okay? So if we are noticing that in conflict, it can be problematic when it's left unconscious. That's where it can become a little tricky, because it can become dysfunctional, it can become split off from the rest of our personality that may not be under direct influence of our ego. Okay, and that's when it's like, oh, I don't know why I did that, right? Or, oh, noticing that certain relationships or certain patterns bring out the best of us, right? Or maybe not the best of us. And obviously in some extreme cases where people can like black out, right? And not to remember how they, did certain things. So obviously the ego is important, and having a coherent relationship with it, or healthy relationship. So, which is in part why I am or have been guided to talk about the chart and the cosmic design from a more holistic, but like truly knowing, really, not just holistic, oh, we need to look at 15 different elements. Even God knows it can feel like that, even when I try to simplify this. But really, and we're going to deepen this next time, right? We're primarily focusing here on the rising sign, but I am now and forever, right, moving forward, going to be not looking necessarily at the rising sign for longer than necessary before we can really see the shadow projection that can exist and sometimes split off, or just being very much projected to others. And literally like having a life of its own, right? Not realize that we need to withdraw that projection. So from the rising sign perspective, here are some phrases that can help you to become aware of it. And I've got slides here following to help you to get clear on this. And if you've done this exercise before and it feels like you're gaining another level here, or you're desiring to do that of awareness, then do this, even if it's like 10, 15 minutes, do it again. If you haven't, then I highly recommend that you do that here, just this part here on focusing on your rising sign for today, okay? So I'm aware I need it. What do I need? We talked about the importance of the moon, the lunar needs, but we have important needs here as well, an important perspective. It's an important attitude, important habit, important energy to work with. And therefore, I intend it. And this is a difference between the ascendant, if you like the core needs here, and then the lunar needs. Because with the moon, we don't necessarily need to intend it. It's like, when people say, oh, just try to be yourself. Well, that's really the moon, right? It's like, just be yourself. Don't even try. It's like you already are that. Now, the ascendant, if you recall, I said we do need to make it a little bit more conscious. Now, there are aspects of the moon that we also want to be conscious of, where we need to amplify, right, that receptivity, or that healing, or that acceptance, or the shadowy expressions of the moon, because we can get stuck in that shadow. But the rising sign offers here an important perspective that, from what I know and experience and realize, actually the sun and the moon are going to benefit as well. Like, this is not separate. Your rising sign is, even it can feel like, it's oftentimes a different sign, not always. But the sun and the moon are going to benefit from it. How will you know? Well, if you look at not just the sign of the sun and the moon, but also the house position or the aspects, you will likely see it like, oh, okay, that makes sense. There is a confirmation, okay? So it's like looking for certain affinities, but you don't have to even overcomplicate. Just trust here that having an intention to express your rising sign consciously, it's like almost like a non-negotiable way, okay, is important. So my primary expressed visible needs, right, different than the lunar needs, are not always visible, right, unless you have moon in Aries, or you have moon in, I don't know, the 10th house, or maybe the 7th even, or maybe the 1st, depending on, let's say, moon in Gemini, right, in the 1st house, we could be very much driven to talk about what we need, right? And so people do know. But if we have it in the 4th, maybe not so much. Or moon in Scorpio, not so much, right? So rising sign, it gives us that like primary expressed. It's easier to actually visibly express it. And the moon, we don't even, again, we're saying they may need to be more private needs. Not everybody needs to know about our moon. In fact, people that are most private, right, closest to us will get to experience it, right? It's like that care, that really deep love, and even deepest compassion, and so on and so forth. Even though as healers, we tend to very much operate from the lunar consciousness, and our clients, right, and our people, our community tends to benefit from that, and that's a good thing. right? Because it helps us to operate from our soul as well. So, but you can see how not everybody would be operating from that perspective, and we're not here to say that everybody has to. So my primary expressed visible needs and where my value system starts. We oftentimes hear people, astrologers, talk about the second house of values, but really the value system in my experience starts in the first house. And then in the second, we kind of need to back it up and really say, this is what I'm actually investing resources in, right? Because it's one thing to have certain values. Let's say Virgo rising, oh yes, health is important. But we're going to typically find that what we've got on, and while I have to choose that consciously, right, the healthy lifestyle and actually specific habits that help me to feel healthy and align and so on and so forth. The second house is really, I have Libra on the second. So to me, relationships come first. To me, peace, right, is important. To me, the being client friendly and socially conscious is important, and so on and so forth, right? So it not important, but like one of the essential things. But what I'm saying is that we need to start at the ascent, because this is, if we jump to the second before understanding our value system in the first, it can feel disconnected. So my signature style brand needs to align with the energy of our ascendant. So for example, Virgo rising need to show up more Virgo-like, which would be clean, neat, preppy, modest. Okay, and we'll see that in some of the examples. Okay, so ta-da, let's look at now. So if you have taken this course before, or you've heard me talk about signature style in the past, this is, however, the first time that I've got the slides and distillation here of, and a really more direct application of working with the paradoxes and of each sign, as well as a little bit more specific here expressed in this format, the 4 levels of each sign expression, right? For example, in the past, I would talk about the importance of listening, right? I would say everybody talks about, communication for Gemini, and important is communication, expressing yourself, right, verbally, in writing, and so on and so forth. But in my experience, I had found that that's actually not it's like the basic fundamental purpose of Gemini is learning and communication. But really, it's opening our mind. It's actually being more perceptive, right? And that requires a listening. It also is the 3rd level I've got here is social engagement, because we can be perceptive and then just keep busy in being perceptive, right? It's like listening to the news and, reading books and just, chit-chatting, and but are we engaging as a result of what we're learning? And then in my experience, the 4th level, not to say that there are only 4, there are many, and I'm sure that I'm going to be discovering more, but these are the ones that I've been working with and discovering and really having fun identifying and working with. And so I invite you also to see how this resonates for you, because I have South Node in Gemini. So to me, that the Gemini one is, I find, the one that I've worked, one of the ones that I worked with the most. Also Virgo, right, just by the virtue of my own design. So for you, it can be based on your Sun, Moon, Ascendant, and the South Node as well, okay? So the first here is what I'm suggesting is to identify, if you'd like, but in my experience, this is not like we're just existing in one of these levels. We could be existing in different areas of our life in on different days, even in different levels here. So this is not meant to be like, oh, I'm operating on this level, and it's not in my case. It is more what I wanted to keep in mind. If you'd like to, if really, it's like optimize the expression and keep in mind. I find a lot of people are not aware of this, interestingly enough. In fact, I wasn't years ago. This was just really years in making to really, really look at what is, just to get away from the descriptive. It's like, oh, great communicator is Gemini. That's like, I've always known that, and I've always seen that is just such a very limited expression. We could be missing so much in terms of how we operate and really what more we can do. But then we've got also the shadowy here, expressions, different levels of it. And by the way, these are not like exactly God-given in this particular way, that, you know, number one is exactly number one or number two, but just generally, this is how I experience and how I advise people depending on where they are at. So at least to kind of move forward into the next effective expression, and obviously being aware rather more of the shadowy expression, and then here. So say for my Aries, right, it's, you know, we talk about the leadership, but in my experience now, and, you know, more so than ever, what if the most ultimate expression of Aries is not about leadership, like the solo leadership? What if it's about self-leadership, right? Like, because I look at it like what would really apply to most people, really, in my experience that I've seen in most charts. Because it starts at the self-awareness and decisiveness, and then willingness to initiate self-directed action, right? Self-directed action. This is different than Libra. Libra is more leaning into friendly, if you like, action, or more graceful and diplomatic, and, you know, kind of like considered action. But for Libra's ultimate here, or if you like, one of the ultimate effective expressions is different. Here is self-leadership, and for Aries, and or if you like, conscious leadership. But to me, conscious leadership is already keeping in mind actually the Aries-Libra polarity. So, you know, this will be a whole other, which I'm going to be talking more about, right? So is there an effective expression just within the sign itself? Yes. Is there an effective expression of the sign that actually entails the polarity itself? Yes. Both actually work, meaning Aries is meant to learn from Libra. But which is not also to say that we cannot learn within and optimize the Aries expression itself. We can. I think you just need to be asking questions, as I had been for years on a daily basis. What is even more effective expression here? That's one of the core questions that I'd be in, like, on a daily basis. So more harmonized, and a harmonized actually way of being, right? We oftentimes talk about Libras and sense of justice and equality, and it's all that. But this is more also to me about way of being as well. And because that's really when we can really bring that more into the world. Okay. Now let's say from a Virgo perspective, I'm kind of going a little bit in where I'm guided, right? We've got here helpful, level 1, level 2, efficient, and which maybe some other people would place efficient as the number 4. I place efficient number 2 because to me, if we are busy Virgo, and by the way, this you can apply this to Sun, Moon, and the Ascendant. In case you're wondering, you can apply this to even your South Node and the North Node, right? You can apply this to any planet, but especially the ones where you are really looking to optimize your expression. Okay, so to me, that impeccability or striving for that is number 3. But really, and we're gonna see this when we talk about the paradox, because to me, like, this is why it's helpful to look at this in both ways, the paradox and then the different levels of expression in a moment. This is not about, like, while oftentimes we'll hear people talk about, oh, the perfectionism, always perfecting ourselves. I don't know necessarily that I would say, in my experience, that I have Virgo rising 29 degree, that it's necessarily about only perfecting ourselves. Because keep in mind, Virgo is the, you know, other than the Libra, it's most distant, really, or further away from Aries, which is about self-realization, right? And self-awareness. Virgo is like, we've got several signs, right, until we got to Virgo. So Virgo here, you know, is it about me and myself, right? I don't think so. I do feel like it's more about, and I think this is for me, why this is helpful to understand this. And by the way, this is very simply distilled here, but there's a lot of wisdom here if you are willing to work on this yourself and meditate on this as well if you'd like and apply it. To me, it's about impeccability of service. and really keeping that humility in mind. And really, what does that even look like? But really at the fourth level, and as I said, not that I here have some sort of exclusive rights on how these levels need to look like. This is on my personal experience and how I suggest to work at it. And then you are likely going to discover new ones as well. But I do want to inspire you to start thinking about these different, maybe, effective expression, and then maybe a more effective expression. So level 4, well-being conscious, being really well-being conscious versus very, let's say if we look at the shadow expression, like work conscious, right? Worry conscious, or even, servitude oriented. Because while we can be in service, if we're in servitude, that's impacting our health, it's impacting our overall well-being. And this is, right, there's a reason that Virgo is considered and really an expression of a high priestess archetype. So, and that's, encompasses a lot, which would require probably a whole class on talking about that. But hopefully this gives you some ideas as to why it would be important to look at. So for Scorpio, I have full presence as the most effective expression, or if you like, one of the most effective ones, following authentic expression. I place authenticity in Scorpio, like that full authenticity, full presence, and what I like to refer to as real-time trust, okay? Intensity, as people will typically, you have to be intense. Yeah. To me, that's number 2. Yes, intensity, but why? Why is that important, right? So are we breaking taboos? Are we exposing truths? Are we being just simply provocative here? If you look at the shadow expression, are we being simply contrarian for the purpose of having power over? See how you can work with this. Are we stuck in some sort of toxic blame, shame game, or are we truly intense or really intimate with life and our own conscious and the unconscious self, right, including our shadow, for the purpose of stepping into our power and really being fully present? That's the power. That's the magnetism of working with the Scorpio archetype. That emotional honesty, not just honesty, but emotional. So important, because it's about emotional healing here. Okay? Steady inner peace for Taurus, not just sensuality. A lot of people I hear, when they talk about sensuality, as if sensuality is the purpose in itself. Now, it can be, right, depending on where we're at. But if that is what we're identifying here with, right, which is the pleasure principle, right, which is Taurus. Self-worth, to me, and I think to probably most astrologers, is an important concept here to keep in mind. Sensuality without worthiness, right, is, to me, a dislocated principle. Because self-preservation here, and we're going to see this in paradoxes, is an important outcome, if you like, right? For Cancer, deep listening. We're talking about listening in Gemini, but is there real listening happening here until we can really create space and nurture that space for healing and forgiveness and deeper listening in Cancer? I'll leave that up to you, right? Emotional maturity as the effective expression. Being radiantly expressive. Why? For, to be, people say, oh, they're just charismatic. Why? Why did God give them the charisma, right? So is it to enjoy more life? Is it to more express themselves? To be, to be just more full of themselves in a good way, to be more influential. Okay, so I'll leave that out. I'll leave that with you. Sagittarius, to write gratitude, important to me, because I could even say gratitude. I could even place that as the highest expression, and I would actually agree with that. Or operating from universal truth is what I've got here as number 4. By the way, in a way, this is a limited, and that's what I intend it to be as well, because you know that I like to place things in, or at least in the past few years, in a way that you can work with it in, because there's just a lot of information, right, in an individual or slide, and kind of see these things at a glance. But there is a lot here that you can work with, right, and dig further into. Capricorn, right, we talk about integrity, we talk about ambition, we talk about pragmatism, and operating from highest integrity, I have here as number 3. But we can operate from highest integrity and not be fully socially responsible, right? We see this, for example, when we look at people that don't identify with conservative principles, such as, let's say, conservative parties and so on and so forth. Oh, integrity, accountable, integrity, but it's like you can see that in many cases it becomes more of it's like the law, abide by the law. Well, yes, we do need to actually here, and we're going to see this in the paradox, right? We do need to abide by the law, but it's the paradox is that we're going to see that a lot of, in fact, and that's probably going to be with Pluto in Capricorn, it's going to be exposed, is how a lot of this unconscious identification with this principle actually is potentially not, it hasn't evolved to the level where, I'm talking about the conservative, right? Very more oppressive or repressive expression of that. That's more, let's say, on the level of just being defined by duty. Oh, duty, right? Oh, lasting values. Oh, merit. But what about social responsibility? What about corporate responsibility, right? To me, that's an important here expression that, for example, Sun in Capricorn has to, and number 3 as well, right? It needs to aim for. Aquarius, social change, right, and humanitarian. Yes, being progressive, but why? Why shall we be progressive? Why is that important? And then in being in divine communion with Pisces. And then you've got here different levels here as well to work with. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense there. And then important paradoxes here that you can work with the paradoxes and these different 4 levels of expression as well. Because there are, I try to not repeat unless it was essential to repeat, so you can really work with both of these and they can inform, and we'll see this in some of the examples, what I mean by working with both of these. So the paradoxes are basically contradictions that exist in a lot of things in life, right? And even including individual archetypes. So the key question here that can help you, right? So yes, we're going to talk about contradictions, but I also want you to keep in your mind, and I will potentially remind you here of this, is the key question to help you land this. Why are we even looking at this? Is what is one willing to do for these principles, for this particular here paradox, or really the perspective seeking that result that we're going to talk about. And then how, if we're not aware of that paradox, what can that create? And then here, just a little bit more of explanation of how to be aware and to start reconciling that inherent paradoxes and contradictions by sign. Okay, so I've got for Aries, I've got the self-realization paradox or self-realization seeking paradox, right? So remember, I said one of the highest expressions of Aries is, yes, it's leadership seeking, right? It's, but what if it's self-leadership? What if we're actually saying we need everybody to know how to lead themselves first, right? And at the same time, activate their own, to be able to respond. That's why I've got here, that we can activate or take action, right? And help other people to move something within themselves or in the world, right? With our help or on their own or together, depending on what we're talking about here. And in Aries, we've got that, winning perspective or solo perspective. But what is one willing to do for self-realization? See what I mean? What is one willing to do to win? What is one willing to do to be activated, right? To activate their passion. So there are many ways that you can look at this and see how we can get in trouble potentially if we stay stuck in our inner Aries on many levels, okay? Where we're like, oh, I got to go solo, right? And in some cases, like, for example, in John Lennon's chart, right? He's got Aries rising. And so for sure, we could say, well, that was, meant to be. Like that actually worked for him, right? To go solo. But he also has Sun and North Node, if you recall. We're going to see his chart again in Libra. So in some cases, these paradoxes are like layered. You have a paradox in an individual sign, and then you have them in a polarity as well. And so you can see how there will be additional complexity if you have the signs that are opposite to each other, or really not necessarily complementing each other in your primary triad. Okay, so for Taurus, I have the self-preservation paradox, and we could have a whole class I have Sun in Taurus, so you bet I can talk about this. And I'm going to have to just stick with some of the basics here, which is why I have them here distilled. We can get stuck in what I mean by self-preservation here. It explains, right? So let's say for Aries, we're seeking autonomy and basic rights and to be self-directed. But the paradox is that Aries needs audience and relationships to be seen. Yeah, we got to step into a leadership. But who are we going to lead if all we're focused on is just self-realization? For what purpose? Having said that, self-leadership, important higher expression of Aries, right? So see how this is, and it's going to depend, right, on obviously what the person's intentions are, what your intentions are, what are you looking to create, where are you in the awareness and relationship with these expressions. But can you see how and how this actually looks like is what I've noticed over and over with Aries, a lot of Aries, especially Sun in Aries, but also Aries rising, is that oftentimes we're helping clients, right, and people to express their Aries and step into leadership, into visibility. But there could be, in some cases, almost equal people pleasing and applause seeking than really the desire to lead and to be self-realized, okay, or to basically to be self-directed. See what I'm talking about? So there's no one size fits all formula here, as you can imagine, because it's going to depend on other elements in the chart. Again, you don't have to look at the whole chart, but do consider where the person's moon is and the North Node, for example, and obviously the ascendant, right? Like the sun, moon, and the ascendant. At least this is going to give you ideas to then really. So for example, if somebody has Aries, but they also have, like John Lennon, right? They have Aries rising, but they also have Sun in Libra, then they are going to have to work with the cooperation or fair compromise seeking paradox. Or if you like, a peace compromise paradox, right? So, because in a Libra, we're potentially here choosing, or that's one of the ways that, we can find people operating, is where peace is important. It's like, oh, peace is the most important. Well, peace is very important, no question about that. And, but what if we're choosing peace over progress? People pleasing and political correctness over change and social change. See what I mean? That's a paradox, right? So which one is more important? Is peace more important or progress is more important? Well, again, I chuckle when people will say and argue that peace is the most important because without peace, we can't have progress. But I also know that these things exist in inherent paradox for a reason. And that sometimes when you have too much peace, you could have too much conformity and correctness, and then lose passion, lose action, right? Lose desire to even express yourself because everything has to be socially accepted, right? So Libra paradox is, it's seeking audience to connect while, it's great to be diplomatic and to be relatable, but and to seek to connect with others. But if we lose our point of view, so really this paradox with Aries and Libra does, right? You can see how it touches on each other. But if we don't have a point of view, and if we're not willing to face conflict from time to time, even to preserve peace or to create teamwork, how are we going to create win-win in all situations? It's just not possible. It's not real. So see what I'm talking about? So we have to be willing to work with these. This is what leaders do. They're willing to work with ambiguity, right? This is one of the even in the modern, right, business, if you like, or psychological theory of emotional intelligence and so on and so forth, is that we got to be self-aware enough and willing to work with ambiguity and so on and so forth. So we have Gemini, the platform seeking and dialogue paradox, right? So we can, and we'll see how this is important when we're talking about signature style. We can talk, oh, communication, we have to communicate more. But remember from that theory of different expressions, do we need to communicate, or do we need to listen, or do we need to engage, or do we need to be more coherent within ourselves and with each other? Or can we present a paradox and say, what is here the key dilemma that this person needs to resolve within themselves? And what if that is the, I call it here the platform seeking and dialogue, if you like, a platform and dialogue seeking paradox or dialogue paradox. So this is important because wherever you have Gemini, especially if it's sun, moon, or the ascendant, you got to understand that this is what the person is looking, they need to speak, right? And so just telling them, oh, you need to communicate. Well, maybe they go, well, I'm communicating, right? Like I'm doing the best that I can, but do they have a platform? And can you see how in this desire to have a platform, there could be some other shadows here, right, that have created, which you can go back, right? If you go back to the previous expression, right, we talked about he being overly adaptable. We talk about flip-flopping, or rather, now we're coming back to that. Flip-flopping often when with unintegrated perspectives. Now, why would we be flip-flopping? Why would we be flip-flopping in Gemini to the point that we can be flaky, right, and overly adaptable? Well, perhaps because in this platform seeking, or even a dialogue, right, understanding seeking, we've become overly influenced by all of these other opinions out there, right? So we need to engage facts, but we also need to, what I suggest to do is engage a dialectic perception. Dialectic means like dialectic reasoning, right? Being willing to consider two ideas, potentially paradoxical, contradicting to each other, but allow them to coexist, and then really either reason it through logic, through facts, engage with it, but also realize that, you see, if we're overly attached to Gemini, we're more likely to, I've got here, we seek objective knowledge. We seek knowledge, we seek to be in the know, yet we find what? We find familiar logic. So it's like, down the rabbit hole of it's like pre-processing ideas that already we had, or we chewed over, right, a million times, because we're not willing to actually read different books. We're not willing to travel, or we're not potentially willing to unpack our biases and to understand that we are, right, the sum of the 5 people that we most talk with or talk about. So this is why there's a Gemini Sagittarius polarity where Gemini can learn from Sagittarius, but there is a paradox that's also inherent within Gemini, and that is that we want to be aware of that. We can seek objectivity, we can seek facts, but we can also find fake news here, right? If we're constantly if our blinders are just to see in a linear way, because we may need to unlearn mindset, right, to basically obviously understand the mental models that we use to make decisions, right? Cancer, the self-acceptance and forgiveness paradox. Yes, here we are very much focused here on healing and to receive safety. I know I've got, it's a more distilled format here, so sometimes the words are a little bit awkward, but the idea here is just to be able to write this in a short format so that you can see this at a glance. What we're looking for here is to seek familial security, but I have FAM. This is oftentimes security within family or security with a clan as well, but it really seek familial or familiar. And then this could be also a feminine presence paradox. Feminine presence, when people say, oh, like when Trump, for example, says, oh, they're too weak on, or, we need to be strong on. Well, he's speaking from his Leo rising, Mars rising perspective. So this, however, right, we're not judging. I'm saying here, this can be a real paradox for people when it comes to their feminine expression, right? We have Angelina Jolie, we have even Dalai Lama. Now he obviously has found a way to work with the self-acceptance and forgiveness paradox, right? And there's an example, because while we need to heal our sense of safety and receiving, here we can also become enmeshed, which creates dysfunction in relationships. We can become enmeshed with our people, with our family, with our people close to us, right? And then who is responsible for our emotions? Who is responsible for our needs, right? Because in enmeshment, we lose sense of personal boundaries. Who is responsible for our boundaries? Okay. Now, Leo is an interesting one. The influence-seeking versus truth-speaking paradox, right? Love or truth, right? So this is a little bit borrowed from Aquarius. And so this could also be called a love-seeking versus truth-seeking paradox, right? Like the favoritism, like paradox, or the popularity, right? And prestige versus freedom of expression. We can say, oh yeah, no, I'm fully expressed. Oftentimes we'll see this with Leo and Aquarius, and we're like, almost, you have to really, this is why I find these are helpful to really see what paradox the person is working with. Are they more in the Leo or the Aquarius side of the polarity? This is about freedom of expression. Well, is it really? Right? Like when you look at somebody like Trump, is it really freedom of speech? Is that really freedom of expression? When we know, and he knows, how popularity and prestige and love and approval and applause oriented he is, right? Because Leo is about really maximum development of personality. And again, there's no judgment here. We need a personality, we need ego. But what is one willing to do for ego preservation? What is one willing to do for influence? What is one willing to do for love and approval? See, that's what I'm talking about, right? For Virgo, what is one willing to do for the perpetual improvement? Perpetual improvement, right? It's like that perfectionism, but this to me is more descriptive, really, of what's going on here. And for, maximum productivity and a minimum waste. So it's like efficiency. What is one willing to do? You would say, oh, well, but every expression has its shadow, because we can be seeking perpetual improvement, but we also need to remember wholeness and well-being and sacredness. Because what could go wrong here? Well, we could be stuck in this perpetual improvement paradox and then not operate from humility, our own, and then believing that we are either better or we can do, because this is oftentimes what we see with very Virgo-oriented people, whether it's conscious or unconscious. There's subconscious potentially belief that only we can do that the best and other people cannot. But really, is that are we operating from humility? And then also, are we remembering that even if other people make mistakes, that really, we're not project to be fixed, and they're not a project to be fixed. That everything is perpetual so as long as we are improvement oriented in that area, but we don't want to be like holding ourselves, feeling bad and feeling flawed, without understanding here that the purpose here is to improve the service, like that's service orientation. But if we focus it too much on ourselves, there is a reason that Virgo is not the first sign of the zodiac, it's the sixth. Okay. And then it leads to Libra, which is seeking audience again to connect, while it may need a point of view, so not to lose a sense of self. Scorpio, dealing with a deep trust paradox. Okay. Now this is a big one, where we're seeking power and intimacy in relationships. While we're seeking power, we're seeking intimacy, we're seeking deep trust. We could be potentially demanding, expecting that for others. But there is such a paradox here, where we could be also undermining other people's power, truth, seeking truth, but actually working to expose truth. But no, there is a healthy paradox within that it does help when we work with this energy. It helps us to expose, somewhat like in Capricorn, to expose corruption. And here it's like power abuse. But we want to, again, we can be overly, if you look back at the different levels of expression for Scorpio, we can be overly attached to one or two, maybe a lower expressions, and really not fully understanding what is the purpose, like what's the best way to work with this energy. Or we could be searching for trust. We need other people to be trustworthy, while actually the trust or the power is hidden within ourselves as self-trust. What if we're actually looking for self-trust? And also looking to, but it's easier potentially to project that onto others. Oh, other people need to, we can read them, we can see the truth behind the truth, while here we're avoiding dealing with emotional pain, and therefore actually not fully embodying self-trust. See what I'm talking about? So there is the deep trust paradox, one way of putting that in. This is so very important, also from a wholeness perspective, from emotional healing perspective. Sagittarius, perpetual growth and higher ground paradox, seeking freedom of exploration and movement, yet really here what we need to embody is faith and gratitude, to be able to reach our vision and release bias and dogma. So we need to gain broader education, is what I'm suggesting, and diversity of unfamiliar experiences to grow. This is not just, oh, I just am about freedom and I'm about truth. This is more than that. Just like we have perpetual improvement in Virgo and perpetual, dialogue seeking in Gemini, we have perpetual growth principle here, and perpetual growth seeking and expansion seeking in Sagittarius. But we get to a point where we probably realize, just like as we're realizing on the planet Earth now, that perpetual growth also has limits. And this is why after Sagittarius, we have Capricorn, that then deals with integrity and success paradox, So we can be results oriented, We want results, Corporations, they're constantly like, oh, we need to perform better results. But what happened with social and corporate responsibility, They got this race to the bottom line results has become disconnected from really truly the lasting values and having a long view, and in many cases even adherence to law, that in fact is what typically conservative perspective really talks about. We can talk about integrity and accountability and fiscal responsibility, for example, but it is interesting, for example, what's happening right now, where there is these distortions that are occurring, with, you could say, with even those that preach that they are the ones that, have more merit or whatever it is, they want respect, but in fact, they're not presenting the long view, and they're actually not presenting that, because one of the important things and paradoxes actually with Capricorn is this seeking authority and recognition from society. Like it actually, somewhat like Aries, like it needs audience, it needs society to recognize it. But the paradox is it actually needs to be okay, make peace with solitude. It needs to be willing to stand alone. And just like we're now expecting, right, in some of these, let's say from a political perspective, people to say enough is enough, like this is not okay. And which basically somebody needs to say, this is just not the value, for example, of the party anymore, of the governance of this company. So this is that integrity, again, success paradox. What is one willing to do to be in alignment with integrity? And what is one willing to do for success, right? What is one willing to do for the social change? The paradox here is that we're developing individuality, and but also need to keep in mind the group think. We need to be basically seek society, greater good of society, yet also individuate from family, friends, and conformity in order to really affect social change. I'll leave you with that. And then the Pisces is the perpetual bliss paradox. Right? So there is a desire here to surrender to more relief or to be rescued from what? From pain, right? Struggle, and then to look for really looking for minimum effort and maximum flow. I find when I put things into more input and output, it helps me to understand archetypes. So Pisces, we're looking for minimum effort, maximum flow, or people will oftentimes say ease and flow, more flow, right? With more ease. But looking for the perpetual ease, like, is that realistic? Well, from Virgo perspective, probably not, because Virgo says, what about improvement? Right? If everything is always easy, what is being developed, what is being improved, what is being, right, created as a result of, like, is it? So here we're seeking relief from struggle and pain, yet we got to watch for self-sabotage and avoidance. Yes, here we're surrendering to, let go and let God, but we're also healing illusion of separation. So there are multiple, we could say there are multiple paradoxes here. And a deep breath, okay? So we're going to be talking more about the paradoxes. Very, very important. I suggest part of understanding, and I hope genuinely that this helps you to deepen understanding of the signs and why it is important. And here actually I have why integrating inherent paradoxes. So it helps us to increase our magnetism, creativity, and credibility, makes us highly magnetic to ideal opportunities, our ideal community, and it's easier for the universe to support us synchronistically. Why? Because when we're actually aware of these paradoxes within ourselves, it just it's almost like things click in better, and there is less of like noise and distortion that kind of takes up our energy and focus and just, creates like this chaotic energy in our field. So when we have more of this sort of harmonized and more coherent energy in our field, it is easier for the universe to support us synchronistically, and then for the ideal collaborators, clients also to recognize us and relate to us. We send a more clear signal, okay? We feel more harmonized and peaceful within ourselves and in our whole well-being, in our relationships, and we feel better in our body and our skin. Number 3, we create with more ease and grace. And it's easier for the universe to support us, right? And other energies to co-create with us. Because we're operating from deeper self-acceptance, for example, right? Let's say if we have Cancer, we have somewhat reconciled that deep self-acceptance or forgiveness, including self-forgiveness paradox, right? Because what's the paradox is that when we have Cancer rising, oftentimes it is easier to give that forgiveness to other, like Angelina Jolie, right, focuses on helping and healing the world and so on and so forth, and women, but is there here enough deeper self-acceptance, right? That if not, what does that create in our field when We're not living that more fully. So operating from deeper self-acceptance, or really whatever, right, is going to be the paradox you're working with, because every one of them, and there are actually many more, offer specific gifts of that paradox integration. Importantly, why I'm so passionate about this is that I believe that it contributes, knowing and working with this and reconciling contributes to bridging of the polarities. And if you like, it shows up as more divisiveness in the world and community. So for easier and more effective solution implementation on a global level, or even just awareness of the solutions, even coming together to discuss the problems and solutions, or even keep the conversation going, like consciously, right? More conscious adult conversation, right? As people will say, civil conversation. I think we need to require more from us, not just civil. Number 5, we contribute to raising of human consciousness on the planet in a joyously abundant, because I believe we're always contributing. We're always contributing. But we can do that in a more joyously abundant and fulfilling way, because this is when we work on reconciling these paradoxes, we actually, I believe, and see we feel more fulfilled. We feel more like ourselves. We feel healthier. We feel more creative. We feel more magnetic. We feel more credible. And then people give us, we build that credibility as well. So it's when we do that more consciously, holistically, strategically, and co-creatively with the universe and all life on the planet, even all energies on the planet and beyond, for infinite reach, expansion, and ascension. Ultimate ascension in alignment with the divine laws. So I believe that when we are doing this, there is something, even with doing that, within reconciling the paradox, that actually honors the divine laws. Even doing this, without even needing to study them in close proximity, if you'd like, I believe that they are hidden or really revealed within these 12 signs and 6 polarities, and then these 12 times 12 paradoxes, okay? Ta-da! So I hope that this makes sense, and I do suggest to spend a little bit time on that, and now we're going to see how this works to apply this in now we talked about paradoxes. Now this is a little bit more intermediate to advanced perspective, even though to me it can feel like that, even though to me it really needs to be like a basis to an intermediate, really, just as really where I'm teaching it right now. Having said that, if you're only interested to just get very basic understanding of what elements you need to keep in mind for your signature style without necessarily amplifying that magnetism, because 10-time amplification, even just to get clear on implementing the elements of sun and moon and the rising sign, is going to give you that, okay, to create your signature style tone. So I have here a slide for you to do that. So sun by sun house, moon by sun and house, which will give you your signature tone and core frequencies that we are already radiating them out, right? But again, you always want to do that more consciously. It's just more fun, and it's actually it sends a more clear signal, okay? So we have the first house ruler. You can include that here as well, and the first house planets, and the 12 house planets if they're close to the cusp. If that's a little extra, just focus on the sun, moon, and the rising sign, like this first part here, okay? And then forget about the other ones. But if you have already if you already have a good sense of the sun and the moon, and it's like, oh, I do have Pluto in the first. Oh, I have Uranus. Okay, if you're kind of waking up to that reality, then include. Don't feel like you need to use the template as it is here. Okay, when there are contradicting sign elements such as sun in Capricorn and moon in Sagittarius, right? Because Capricorn is part of that contraction principle, more conservative, and Sagittarius is more expansive and liberal, if you like. Then consider the ascendant and the north node for an aligned attunement and a more effective expression. Okay. So if there is a planet that's in the first or just before the cusp or really close to the cusp of the ascendant, then I will refer to it as an amplifier. And then if there is a planet deeper in the first, I will call it a modifier. Not really key, but just sometimes like when you hear me refer to that, that you know what I'm talking about, okay? And I have here slides for you that if you had studied with me in the past, you have seen before, that very specifically with keywords give you your, what I refer to as your key evolutionary choice to show up in this way to fulfill your purpose. And that I do believe that we choose to be born during the time that we were born, that allow us to be what we're meant to be in alignment with the rising sign. So I chose to be born during the time that allowed me to be Virgo rising, healthy and approachable, productive, efficient, wellness-oriented, right? And then I have some keywords here in terms of the look, right? Clean look, preppy, tidy, modest, understated, wholesome, functional, work-oriented, professional, organized. Like you can add stuff here as well, okay? Versatile and witty for Gemini, or Mercury in the first house, by the way. Active and passionate for Aries, or Mars in the first. Or Mars, right, by the way, could be in the 12th, like for Trump. It's just behind the first house cusp. That's going to be an amplifier of that sign that Mars is in. For him, it's amplifier of Leo, right? So comfortable and sensual for Taurus, creative and happy and likable, right? Star image for Leo. Elegant and relatable and refined for Libra. Scorpio would be magnetic and perpetually transforming. Sagittarius, adventurous and free in cosmopolitan style. Capricorn, successful and standing in my integrity, right? So more mature, more conservative as well, and professional if you like. Aquarius, individualistic and original. And Pisces, wise and relaxed, right? So it's a little bit, now this doesn't mean that when you see every person with Pisces rising, you're actually going to be a relaxed style. A lot of people are going to be struggling with this and actually learning to become a less self-conscious. So this is very, very important. You're gonna, in fact, remember the ascendant I said earlier is oftentimes an important energetic nutrient that we actually need to take in a little bit more. I oftentimes see people with Pisces rising that are very self-conscious, but until they realize that, and other elements in their chart, let's say planets in the first house, are going to show you that, let's say strong Aries or something like that. In addition, the ascendant is meant to remind them, you got to relax, you got to, right? Just not everything has to be like perfect. Okay, see how it works. And then another slide that actually shows you specific keywords for what the intentions and needs of each sign. I'm aware I need, therefore I intended no matter what. And this is important from your signature style perspective. Okay. A little bit a slide that we've already seen on the planets. So when you have these planets in the first house, to remind yourself what they could also bring forth. And then when we look at some examples, now in the past, right, we have seen Angelina Jolie's chart, and then we would talk about this Cancer rising, and then with the Venus on the ascendant, which, by the way, would be like having Cancer rising and like Taurus subtone, right? In simple terms, we could translate this as she needs to make peace with the body. Because remember, wherever I see Venus, I will say you got to make peace with that part of you, or that person, or whatever that expression of you is, which for Venus in Cancer would be with motherhood, with self-mothering, with self-acceptance. But from a paradox, if we now look at the paradoxes, right, I'm here to remind you that she actually here, right at the more, looking at that effective expression really, right, just to be more harmonized within herself, she needs to reconcile the self-acceptance forgiveness paradox. What are we talking about here is nurturing spaces for healing and forgiveness, and develop deep listening, but herself and her body, right? Because this is on the first house. First house is always about the body and the relationship with self. And then more emotional maturity versus enmeshment, right? We can talk about fighting for social justice with that Mars in Aries and Moon in Aries, right? Or we can talk about the self-realization seeking paradox. Now this would explain, right, potentially from this perspective here, that we could say, oh, this probably would be somebody that would be more compliant in a marriage or more family oriented. And yet, here with that strong Aries, there is a strong, right, triple, quadruple with the midheaven, self-realization, seeking parent, self-leadership, right? The importance of taking action and then also attracting, this is right, that activate, attract, or activate, relate team. This is so very important, right? So this is not just she needs to step out, she needs to be visible. That's part of that, because she also needs to resolve here are the paradoxes that while she can step into leadership and visibility, which she has done, she also needs to lead her own life and feel like she's in charge of her own life. That's what I'm talking about. And then with the sun in Gemini, oh, here we go. The platform and dialogue seeking paradox, seeking objective knowledge, yet finding familiar logic. And that importance of engaging and listening more for that, you could say, multidimensional perception or dialectic perception. Now, why would this be important? You would say, oh, well, Milada, she may have already done it. She may have already done it, but because of her Cancer rising, she may have also be prone to that more familiar logic where, for example, she may have now developed more of a perspective of understanding things from a female perspective, right? That could be familiar logic. And maybe not, I'm just saying maybe she's done both. You see what I'm talking about? So it's like from that Gemini Cancer, we could get stuck in what we've inherited from our parents, from our siblings, from what we've learned through our upbringing, what's more easier, like learned in school and so on and so forth. Hence, right, there are polarities that challenge that, such as Sagittarius and Capricorn, okay? And if you're looking just at the elements of her signature style and her Gemini, Sun, and Aries Moon, right, pulling some keywords here from those slides here will give you some ideas that can sound like, right, being which she is. Now, of course, we already know that about her, so it's easier in this sense. Being an advocate for women's rights, right? Where did we get that? Moon in Aries, empowered, feminine, courageous feminine, right? Cancer rising, yes, that describes her style as romantic and feminine and nurturing and family-oriented, and we know how important that is to her. And then from signature style tones perspective, that's soft, feminine, and now even more, right? Maybe even more than ever before. Maybe when she was younger, it was more like a lunar face and very lunar and, you know, feminine perspective, especially with that Venus rising. But now we got to keep in mind that this is also mother principle. How important is that to her now to appear as a great mother? Yeah, probably a lot, right? So feminine empowered. What did I get? Feminine empowered. Cancer rising, if you do want to include the ruler of the first, you don't have to, as I said, you can just work with the sun, moon, and the rising sign and then see what you get based on this. Play with that, have fun. But if you do look at the ruler of the ascendant, right, in her case, she has Cancer rising, but moon is not in a Cancer. Moon is in Aries. So that goes back to moon and Aries, right? That it's already included here because sun and moon are two important elements of her signature. They need to inform her signature style. So for example, how this important is if you see somebody, for example, if she only was looking to like, if somebody was just told her, oh, you just need to like, you know, a sexy style and you know, bring that goddess Venus, and she's done that. And not to keep in mind, like disregard the fact that it's Cancer rising. This would not be very aligned for her, right? Would not be very aligned. This is why it's so very important. It actually would be in conflict with how she's looking to appear. That's actually beyond the brand. You see what I'm talking about? It actually speaks to some primary values about, for her, would be about importance of family and even, right, obviously parenting and so on and so forth. Although that Venus in the 12th will give and amplify, right, that sensual, soft, feminine of Cancer. So if anything, this can also say let's soften your brand a little bit. So whatever it is that you may, be interesting, right, on her website or in her expression or whatever, it's the importance of softening it, because it's the first 2-3 elements. Because she can't not be her Aries moon. The chances are, and then oftentimes people say, oh, do what the moon, do branding, or, more make sure you bring your Aries moon. I find that people will do that regardless. If anything, our role may be more in just helping them understand these paradoxes and that we're talking about, okay? And sun and moon, and so first steps, right, identifying sun, moon, and ascendant. So we're talking about the ascendant today. Once again, for Angelina, that Venus is the amplifier, right? It's why? Because it's very close to the ascendant. If Venus was here, it was in the first house, but it was like deeper in the first, I would have referred to it as a modifier. Not super important, but just so that we have some sort of language around this, okay? And just a little bit like breaking down here, right, how, what we've done in terms of understanding her ascendant. So step number 1, Cancer rising, and then literally pull the words from that: compassionate and open, right? We can say, caring style, but we can say being compassionate and open, right? Warm. We can say vintage as well, open-hearted, nurturing. And this, by the way, again, would be relevant for multiple perspectives. And step number 2, Venus rising in Cancer. So it's an amplifier. So I'm saying that as a step number 2. It's basically like you can't miss it, right? If you have a planet that's right there close to the ascendant, you need to include it, because otherwise it's got something maybe off in helping people to get a sense of their signature style, okay? And then you can look at the ruler of the ascendant for additional information if you'd like, okay? Especially if you see how Cancer and Aries are pretty different. I mean, they're both like pioneer. They like to initiate specific action, although obviously we are more aware of that in Aries. Cancer is more about, just staying safe and so on and so forth. But they're both cardinal signs. And they both indicate changes of when the sun is in those signs, indicate changes in seasons. So depending on where you're at with this, you can spend some time on that. I think what was different here, what is interesting is to see how Angelina expresses this paradox, if you like, on feminine empowerment. And that's that Cancer rising and moon in Aries. She says, on a personal note, I do not feel any less of a woman. Right? This is after she had made her choice to remove her breasts, right? After realizing that she found that, right, they found that gene for potentially having a cancer. I feel empowered that I made a strong choice that in no way diminishes my femininity. You can see that clearly how she expresses that. We could have said, oh, make sure your style is feminine, but that empowerment to her is important, that even that Aries moon is going to say, yes, we're going to have a feminine presence with Cancer rising, but we're going to do that on my terms, right? So it's like there's first part of that statement and then the second part of that statement that moon in Aries informs, okay? Justin Trudeau, for example, that has Virgo rising, moon in Aries, similar like Angelina Jolie, and then sun in Capricorn. So for his style, right, what do we suggest here? So healthy and approachable, productive, efficient, wellness-oriented, clean look, preppy, tidy. He definitely does that, modest, understated, and I think this is where he gets a little bit trickier. I would say that it's definitely a little bit more of that. I can see that he does a little bit of that Leo, or maybe Aries moon that we can see. And anyway, we don't have to get like too here, but hopelessly. So I can see how now, based on some of the recent challenges that he has had in, I want to say, with this perpetual improvement and humility paradox, I talked about before in previous classes, importance of really operating from highest integrity, right? And creating experiences that really, ensure that he doesn't take shortcuts. This was even before all of this recent stuff with that scandal, right? Where apparently now he's been found to have influenced the judicial process that's supposed to be independent. It's almost like very paradoxical that it's almost in some way what Trump has been very overtly doing. But when you have, like I've said before, when you have Sun in Capricorn, you cannot take shortcuts like that. To me, when I see people Sun in Capricorn and even rising, you have to make sure that this integrity and success paradox is, you are aware of it. Again, what are you willing to do to stay in integrity? What are you willing to do for success? Can you see how, had he been aware of this, like this potentially could have, right, helped him avoid the huge credibility gap. Now, Virgo rising, you may wonder, but Milada, how would Virgo rising help? It would help hugely. I can see how he's sort of flirting with a little bit more arrogant approach than Virgo. I would have said, if he had been aware of working with Virgo rising, and by the way, I have Virgo rising, so I have to keep it in mind all the time. And I can see how God placed Virgo rising in our chart for a reason. I have Pluto rising. So I don't know if I didn't, if I didn't have Virgo rising, I don't know how effective this Virgo rising or any rising sign would have been. I can see how that combo really, really, and again, I am still developing a relationship with it. What I'm going to say, that really developing more humility, and really, I don't want to say even developing humility, but really reconciling the perpetual improvement in humility paradox, the best way that I can describe it, or if you'd like, selfless service, but really understanding that the maximum productivity and minimum waste paradox also needs to be reconciled, because if he says I have done, if he justifies what he's done, and look at that, right? We can even talk about this here, right? Perpetual growth, right? And bias here. But anyway, but we're just going to look at Sun and the Moon. If he says, oh, well, I've done this because I have a justification, and that is that it's all for the more jobs, right? Canadian jobs. Maximum productivity, minimum waste. Well, but you have Sun in Capricorn. So we got to look at that together, right? But you have the integrity and success, but you have a responsibility to lasting values. And again, you could be seeking authority and recognition from society, but you need to be okay, right, with solitude. We need to be okay to say, I'm going to make a difficult decision here, and I'm not going to influence, right? Even if it's like difficult, even if I can lose freaking votes and not create as many freaking jobs, right, in this economy to fulfill this, one of the core election promises. Because remember, again, anyway, hopefully you can see here what I'm talking about. And then plus knowing that he has a self-realization seeking paradox, like this is so important to keep in mind, and it's in the 8th house. But if he tries to play this Aries moon as if it was like in the 10th, this is when he can get in trouble, right? This is where where that arrogance can come through. And this is why I say, do not judge what you see. Moon in the 8th says, keep it in the 8th, okay? You are a fighter, but be a fighter for certain things that are maybe not that, right? Exposing some of the 8th house stuff, exposing some of the taboos. He could have been somebody who exposed, right, the corruption, rather than being caught up in that. Anyway, you can see I'm a little triggered by. So you can see here when we talked about the different expressions, right, Aries, of Aries archetype and paradox, or really those 4 levels of expression, you can see here, did he express the self-leadership? See, that's what I'm talking about. If we only stayed at the level of, oh yeah, he's leader, oh yeah, he was a boxer, oh yeah, he's very strong. But is that conscious leadership? What did he model for us there? Like for all people that actually really believed and trusted in him, including me. So needless to say, a bit disappointed with that. And but really, I mean, doesn't really matter what I've got to say, right? To me, really, the biggest messages here are what we all can learn from obviously these visible examples, right? Public examples, and also how important it would be to work with this in our own charts as well. Okay, and how much information it can give us, right? So if he, for example, if he kept, so is it social responsibility here or corporate responsibility? Number 3 here, I have expression for Capricorn is being defined by duty, but I have that as, and by the way, this is a shadow expression, being defined by duty. Oh, I have to create jobs. Well, what are you going to use as an, excuse for doing things that, you would have judged other people for doing in the past? Being oppressive, right? Due to fear of being rejected by people who would vote for you. You see what I'm talking about? So there's a lot here. And then we could, right, buy here into this, or really, right, that moon in Aries could show up with a superiority or even arrogance, if not being combative, right? Now, it is in the 8th, so he probably would never show that openly, but he's had somewhat, again, with the Virgo rising definitely helps. So hopefully you see what I mean, how universe is strategic and it will place that Virgo rising when there is, or Libra rising, you've heard me say that before, when there is a strong Aries or even strong Scorpion Pluto, and it actually makes sense. Okay, some of the quotes here, I'm not going to get into that now. I talked about this before, about some of the things that he stands for. I'm actually now a little bit more critical than I was in the past, although I did point to his Sun in Capricorn many, many times as a potential credibility gap, just because I know that it's so critical. This is also for people with strong Saturn, or angular Saturn, which he does have as well. So Donald Trump, we've looked at his chart before. There I have a lot of stuff here written up, right? Just from a Gemini Sun perspective, being the spokesperson for everyday people who speak the layman language, right? People that are, we know, right, for Donald Trump's middle-aged, non-college white man with no political voice. And we will talk more about that when we talk about clients and then the membership and so on and so forth here. And then he is very confident, proud, and theatrical, a Leo rising, and why he identifies with the privileged as well, and then desires to appear superior, and why part of his style is this, I need to be strong on, right? That's the Mars rising. It's the very Leo, right? And plus, he also has here, about 20 degrees or so of Virgo as well, which is why he can pass as the, also working for working class people, but really his priority here is Leo. So we can see that we know is going to take precedence. And this is why it's important to understand that. And yet with the moon in Sag in the 4th, how he identifies with traditional values, and why he can also identify with the, I'm going to say, white evangelical base and the patriotic base, right? Because he's patriot, if not a nationalist. We're going to say he is a nationalist. He's self-admittedly, right, and racist. And so, and not everybody, of course, and I've said this many, many times, right, with Moon and Aries will be, but how important it is to keep in mind at the fundamental here level, this education and communication gap, right? This for him with the 4th and the 10th would be the anti-establishment paradox, right? This is what we talked about in the past. But for today, to simplify that a little bit, just when we look at the sun, moon, and the ascendant, right? Which we already talked about. Let's say, with Angelina Jolie's son, and now Trump has it. Obviously, here it's going to show up in a different way. But he's also dealing with a platform and dialogue-seeking paradox. Now, when we know that, does it surprise us that he tweets so much and that he seeks objective knowledge, yet finds familiar logic and needs to engage and listen more for dialectic perception? right? Because he's only listening to the one-sided news, and then, right? Yes, he may be operating, he may be listening, we don't really know who, and he's perceptive, but apparently he's watching a lot of news. You see what I mean? So it's like an expression of that. Social engagement, yes, but again, at what level and who he's really engaging with is he coherent? Probably we would disagree with that. I would say, at least in a more holistic way, he may be coherent to and speaking to the base that he is very attached to here, right? The patriots, if you like, and the nationalists, and the ones that he feels safe to be free, right? This is the moon in Sagittarius in the fourth, right, where he can rally people, and they're gonna applaud him, but if they don't applaud him, right? How does that work? So then here we also have that flip-flops often with unintegrated perspectives, really important to keep in mind. But this is with Gemini alone paradox. Now, what happens when you have moon in Sagittarius and sun in Gemini conjunct the nodes? So the nodes, so the double, like this is like a double, triple flip-flopping paradox to reconcile. Obviously, to be born with this means that the universe and the soul himself or itself thought he can do that. So obviously that's what his work is. Is he doing that? I don't know. I'm going to leave that up to you, right? We can talk about this creative and happy and likable and lovable, right? Why it is important for him to be loved, and right, the influence seeking, or really the love and approval seeking. Very Leo, right? Especially the approval of the strong man, right? With Mars rising. But what is one willing to do for ego preservation? What is one willing to do for image preservation? Is he able to hold a bigger perspective here with the moon, right, in Sagittarius? Well, we could say on some level, I guess he is, to be able to have been elected a president and actually represent in America and so on and so forth. But important here paradox to work with, should he be willing, right, is perpetual growth and higher ground, like to gain broader education and diversity of unfamiliar experiences in order to grow, right? Seeking freedom of exploration and movement, yet importance of embodying faith, gratitude, and visions to release bias and dogma. So see how that can apply to him. Okay. So just some quotes here. I'm not going to get through all of them, but we will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again, and we will make America great again. You can see that Leo rising, can you? Now, by the way, and I've shared this before, every country has a horoscope as well, and represented by a sign based on when their birthday is. Obviously, America was born a Cancer, right, with sun in Cancer, on July 4th. So, and Trump has 3 planets in Cancer. This is where the patriotism, the protectionism, even the misogyny here, I want to say with Venus, Saturn comes. And if you like, even a fear of the feminine within himself, right? If not here, really unconscious hate of the feminine, if not women, right? But you can see here why he would identify with America. And the great and proud obviously would be the Leo. It's actually expression of his own style, the whatever way, right? That he's expressing that we will make America strong again. That's expression of his masculine, right? It's like if you said somebody, oh, you need to have a strong brand or masculine or, right, passion, that would be Mars rising. We will make America proud again. That's that sort of luxurious style, right, of Leo rising, and also prestige oriented. We will make America safe again. That is Cancer. And that is now he actually has sun in Gemini, so we would have to keep that in mind. And we will make America great again. This is also very Leo. So you can very much see, can you see how there's like a Leo and Cancer elements here In fact, I would say that that's in part actually Sagittarius, moon in Sagittarius as well. It's somewhat like a higher octave, you could say, of Leo, like very expansive, like we're going to be big, right? Like the obsession with the big and with growth. And so I'll keep it at that. A little bit more here to read on his faith, and why? Because why do I have these codes? Because of that moon in Sagittarius, right? So that's yet to see. He put on quite a religious show in his speech and in prayer services Friday and Saturday. Yet to many observers, that's all it was, a show in which Trump seemed to be overcompensating because he has shown a little depth of faith before. How is that for moon in Sagittarius in the 4th? And then he says, I have a great relationship with God. I like to be good. I don't like to have to ask for forgiveness, right? Venus, Saturn in Cancer, and I am good. I don't do a lot of things that are bad. I try to do nothing that is bad. That's moon in Sagittarius for you speaking. And then he talks about winners and losers. And my style of deal making is simple and straight. I aim very high, and then I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get what I'm after. He actually describes exactly his signature style, which is Mars rising. I keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Like I'll just basically push his, as far as he can. My whole life is about winning. I don't lose often, almost never, right? No dream is too big, no challenge is too great. You can see how he identifies with that Mars. But I also, because that Mars is the 12th, I want to suggest that why he's overcompensating is because it actually feels a little inferior. It's not an easy place for a Mars in the 12th house, especially in a masculine body, and somebody with Leo rising, right? Richard Branson, you can see Leo rising, but it shows up in a different way, but that's a similar paradox. Now, there I had for Trump the influence seeking or the love and approval seeking versus truth speaking paradox. Here I'm going to add the influence and fun seeking. And but the difference is here that Richard Branson has Pluto that adds magnetism, and it actually adds sex and danger appeal and a certain dose of skeptical nature. Okay. Now he also has the self-acceptance and forgiveness paradox. Now the sun is in the 12. So this basically what this does is adds a very softened expression of the desire to heal, right? And help healing of the world, because the 12th is very unity oriented. And this, these are his retreats and his basically his island, right? That's very much at the the end of the world, and where he helps to preserve the nature, but also invites other people to come to this very exclusive, right, Leo rising, right, prestige oriented, exclusivity oriented, you could say, style. Yet he's got this very down to earth, the moon in Virgo, the perpetual improvement and humility paradox. So maximum productivity and minimum waste. So it's saving oriented and frugal oriented. So we talked about in the past, or you may be familiar, that Richard Branson also was known to, or be suspected to be, I don't know exactly how that all played out, to be suspected for tax evasion and so on and so forth. So just something we wouldn't necessarily be, right? And Pluto in the first also adds here that it does say it's to reserve the right to keep certain secrets, and even Sun in the 12th, we would say here that probably there are things that he does want to keep to himself, and in fact what he does is not meant to be for everybody. Okay, now it can have a global impact still, because the 12th house is very multidimensional, but you can see here how this informs his style, which is very, very fun, loving, confident, theatrical, right? Also for Trump, very theatrical, if not cartoonish in his case, right? That compassionate, giving, right? Very Sun in Cancer, creating experiences to express that nurturing nature, but Pluto and Leo adding that personal magnetism and transformational. I would translate that as transformational leadership because Pluto is in Leo. Okay, but the moon in Virgo adds that healing service and earth preservation element. And some of his books, and we're going to talk more about this in one of the next classes when we talk about the marketing and messaging, and how that very much is translated from his design, but how much he talks about having fun, right, and staying green, how that's very much expression of his Leo rising. And yet secrets as well. They won't teach you at business school. That's Pluto rising. And then Virgin, right? That's this moon in Virgo as it happens. Finding my virginity, the virgin way. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. This is very much the expression of his rising Leo and moon in Virgo, if you'd like. Okay. And a couple more examples here that you can see of the paradoxes, and even if you like a simplified way without necessarily, we don't need a template every time. You can just write certain things on a chart. Let's say your own chart that you print, and then you have certain keywords that you resonate with, whether it's a paradox, whether it's a descriptive. The paradoxes are going to allow you to go deeper. Obviously, the descriptive words are going to allow you to get a sense of more clear sense of your signature styles. So for John Lennon with Aries rising, and he's surprised that he was chose to be born during the time that would allow him to be active and passionate, right? To be because Aries is very anti-consensus, right? Rebellious, solo-oriented, right? So he had a band for the longest time, and then he actually had a solo career, right? So if you saw this, if somebody came to you and it's like, oh, I have a band situation and we are not maybe getting along and so on and so forth, and you saw that Aries rising, and so on, right? So what, and then you also saw Sun in Libra. What would you say? These are double these are very much like that double paradox here we can see. Definitely a double one because you also not just the Aries, Libra rising and the Sun, right? So the two of the three core elements are in a sign opposite to each other, but also the nodes. So I've listed here the three core paradoxes that he's dealing with, and you can see that, right? So he's got the self-realization seeking paradox with the Aries rising. He has the cooperation, which is a peace over progress. So he needs to create experience. He needs to lead. He needs to create experiences, right? But you need to keep in mind is what we talked about last time with the Sun and the Moon. What is the difference? With the Sun, we need to make effort to create experiences. Right? It's like the cycle stops with him. It's like the peace starts with me. That's the teamwork starts with me. And then still, but what about Aries? How do we reconcile that? Well, everybody's going to reconcile that differently, but he's going to have to actually step up in a singular way. He's going to basically reconcile this idea and the need even to be noticed as an individual, right, for the self-realization paradox, or and then at the same time to be able to relate to others. And so we can go more into that, but he also has a social change paradox, right? We talked last time about the the relationship with the mother principle and so on and so forth, and abandonment, and a little bit on that. But really, the moon, this paradox is such an important one from a wholeness perspective to reconcile, right? Seeking greater good, seeking greater good in society, yet to individuate from family, friends, and conformity to affect social change. Meaning it was, we can say, oh, where is my mother? Where is my father? And yet he has Moon in Aquarius in the 11th, right? A little bit more social moon than a typical one. And then he says, trying to please everybody is impossible. So he obviously attempted, right? with the North Node in the Libra. So this is a huge, huge paradox. If you did that, you'd end up in the middle with nobody liking you. You've just got to make the decision about what you think is your best and do it. I'm a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets his violence. That's what Yoko has taught me. I couldn't have done it alone. It had to be a female to teach me. That's it. Yoko's been telling me all the time, it's all right, it's all right. I look at early pictures of myself and I was torn between being Marlon Brando and being the sensitive poet, the Oscar Wilde part of me with the velvet feminine side. I was always torn between the two, mainly opting for the macho side. That's his Aries rising, because if you showed the other side, you were dead. So we do get in touch with our Aries. We do get in touch with our rising sign earlier on in our life. We grow into the sun, right? So that would make sense. Ooh, and then he says, we all have a Hitler in us, but we also have a love and peace. So why not give peace a chance? Sun in Libra, North Node in Libra. My role, and Mars in Libra, by the way, my role in a society or any artist's or poet's role is to try and express what we all feel. Aries is about self-expression, not to tell people how to feel. And not as a preacher, not as a leader. Now that's interesting, not as a leader. That to me is a paradox that he's still reconciling, right? Because it's like, I want to be a peacemaker, I want to be liked, but then I also know I need to do things. So how he's going to do this obviously was all up to him. Not as a leader, but as a reflection of us all. Right now, the public is your only criterion. You can aim for a small public, a medium public, but for myself, I like a large public. And I made my decision in art school. If I'm going to be an artist or whatever description, I want the maximum exposure, not just paint your little pictures in the attic and don't show them to anybody. When I arrived in art school, there were lots, but this is North Node in Libra, so he realized he needs audience. Not just to keep, because South Node in Aries would have just, in the 12th, would have like, keep my art to myself, right, in my secret abode. When I arrived in art school, there were lots of artsy-fartsy guys and girls, mainly guys, going around with paint on their jeans and looking just like artists. And they all had lots to talk about and knew all about every damn paintbrush. And they talked about aesthetics, but they all ended up being art teachers on Sunday, or Sunday painters. I got nothing from art school except for a lot of women, a lot of drink, and the freedom to be at college and have fun. I enjoyed it like hell, but for art, I have never learned a damn thing. We'll talk more about this next time, how, to me, he is disowning a bit here his Libra ascendant, right? He is actually, even though he's like battling it out here with the Aries, Libra, peace and war, art and macho, he is opting, he's realized I need to do more. And, you know, rightfully so in some regard, but is there always a more effective expression of these paradoxes? And yeah, I believe yes. And then what happens, he attracts a partner with a Libra rising and Aries on the ascendant. Now, this doesn't always happen, but it does happen sometimes. And then she says, Yoko Ono, that is, a dream you dream alone is only a dream you dream together is a reality. How's that for Libra rising? You can be very wild and still be very wise. I like artists who have something to say, not wallpaper. So she likes art. So this is now who she attracts, is the strong. She attracts John Lennon, basically. We'll talk about that next time. Life with another person is always difficult. So see how much of that Libra orientation, partnership orientation here there is. We live too long for one marriage. And then she also, there's another here, awareness here where she said there's nothing bad about feminism. We have to help each other because there's a lot of women in the world who are suffering because of the fact that we're not equal. It's as plain as that. It's still a man's world. I don't know. We'll go on with that. And she talks about how women were attacked so much, right? So she's, in a sense, explaining why she's choosing the Libra rising. And yet, when critics describe her style, now this is interesting, right? Talking about signature style. And by the way, she has Sun in Aquarius and Moon in Sagittarius and a Libra rising. But remember when I say Aries and the ascendant descendant is the most important perspective, like especially from your perspective of your ascendant to operate from. At 85 years old, Ono is a seasoned veteran at combining aggressive but nuanced language and imagery. Since emerging from the New York art scene, the Japanese immigrant has forged her work's trajectory at the intersection of peace and a war. It's interesting that they don't say war and peace, but peace, that's Libra, and war. She has Uranus in Aries there, through painting, performance, art, and music. Then she says, we can either fight and kill or shake hands and make a beautiful world together. Which would you like? Among Ono's long list of convictions, self-love has always been at the forefront. This is designated in I Love All of Me. If you can't accept yourself, then how could you accept other people? So this is very much the Libra paradox, but you can see how she's at the same time having to deal with that Aries Libra paradox together. It's not, we can dissect it to the sign on its own, but really they are operating together. Here is Kamala Harris with her platform and dialogue seeking paradox on the Gemini, and seeking objective knowledge, yet finding familiar logic, needs to engage and listen more for dialectic perception. How does that apply to her? Well, recently, after being one of the, and still is, I think one of the 3 or 4 contenders, right, for winning the presidential, well, first of all, the Democratic candidate, right, representative, and then potentially to write the presidential election. She has been more recently critiqued, right, for flip-flopping, frequently not having a clear position on certain issues. Now, I understand that that's how people see that, but I also, from when I look at her design, I can see why that's actually needed. We'll talk about this more. I know that is there here a higher expression of this? Absolutely, right? We need to listen, we need to be perceptive, we need to socially engage, which she does. We need to be then coherent, and then, right, stay away from these little less effective expressions in order to build credibility. Okay. And lastly, Dalai Lama with his Cancer rising, Sun in Cancer and Moon in Virgo, also dealing with the self-acceptance and forgiveness paradox, and how relevant that is for him. Those are key things that he teaches about. Right, he's absolutely made peace, I want to say, with that feminine presence for him, and emotional maturity. That's the emotional, I refer to it as emotional maturity axis, the Cancer Capricorn. And at the same time, he has the Moon in Virgo, which is the perpetual improvement and humility paradox to work with. And when I look at this, I do believe that he's absolutely working with this very effectively, because he very much has realized, right, that he needs to teach kindness, compassion, nurturing, forgiveness, acceptance, tolerance, right? And yet he integrates that with a self-disciplined, mature, and a resilient perspective. So he's addressing this empathy and compassion gap in what he teaches, and including in the curriculum that he's created and co-created with others in the schools system, and all the alternative school system there. And then the integrity, achievement, and social responsibility gap, right? This is through that polarity of descendant, but also the nodes, the North Node in Cancer, and then the South Node here. It's a little bit more detail there, but can you see how important it is to bring the elements of our Sun, Moon, and the Ascendant into our style, and let that really inform our signature style, inform our really way in the world. And we'll talk more about the Dalai Lama's books and how really his design reflects that very much. You can read up a little bit on this. and everything pretty much that he does, and his principal commitments, right, to compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, contentment, and encouraging everybody to be happy, is very much is expression of that Cancer rising. And by the way, Sun in the first, which is as if having what? Subtone of a Leo. And that one of the higher expressions of Leo is what? Is to, well, the way how I would express it is actually importance of having a healthy backbone in order to reach true happiness. Okay. And with that said, we arrive to the end of this presentation. Your quiz questions, if you'd like them for today: what are the 3 key astro elements that can help you create your unique signature style, right? So based on your sun, moon, ascendant. And what are the 3 key, or 3 key paradoxes you are grappling with based on your primary triad? So maybe start with 1, right? If you'd like, obviously start with the signature style first, and then you've got some extra work here if you are interested, and hopefully that helps you to deepen your understanding of not just your signature style tones for social engagement, presence, for brand identity, but also for better understanding yourselves, importantly, right? Ta-da! So thank you for listening, participating, and bringing your energy to this. And I am going to be coming back next time for your video class number 3 next week. We're going to talk about core values and monetizable gifts, including aligned money channels, and how this needs to inform your offers. And this is just a template that you can work with if you'd like for your getting clear on your signature style tones. And just a reminder, depending on where you're at, just focus on the sun, moon, and the rising, and then only include the other 3 if you do notice here that you have a planet that's close to the ascendant, either in the first or the end of the 12th house. Okay. So, ta-da! With that said, huge hugs, and hope this served and inspired you to get more clear on who you are and who you're being in the world, and how you can be more relatable and clear of really how to take a stand and a certain position and a perspective. And then if you'd like, obviously get clear on your how to even amplify the magnetism within yourself and within what you're putting out there, right? And so I'd found in my experience that through understanding paradoxes, actually, it's the way to do that. Just there's energetically, it happens because, as I said, it creates more coherence in our field, more awareness, and then more shifts that those particular paradoxes offer through harmonizing them or reconciling them or even working with them. Okay. So thank you for participating and listening, and looking forward to reconnecting again very soon. Bye for now.